Hi everyone, so you're going to be starting Unit 2 soon, so this is just a voiceover and a short PowerPoint to indicate to you what the tasks are. The basic aim in Unit 2 is that we're looking at Freire, and by now you probably figured that Paulo Freire is a key scholar and writer in terms of critical pedagogy. You really can say he coined the terms, and he's the founder of that sort of scholarly movement. We're not going to go back to Pedagogy of the Oppressed because obviously it's a book and it would be a lot to read within a 6-week period. But we are going to work from 4 different articles, and we're going to get you quickly within a unit to try and extract the key elements of what is left of Freire now that 21st century authors are continuing that work. So we're going to basically look at Freire not historically, but look at it at the key principles that have survived and being applied now by authors and writers. So these are objectives for this unit: review Freire's theoretical foundations of critical pedagogy, identify in which ways it draws from critical. I've adapted that slowly. So I will, in the recap, in the collaborate, I will talk about critical theory and postmodern thought, how it blends both, but you don't have to do this for the unit. But I'm giving you a heads up, I will discuss that. We're going to come up with a working definition of critical pedagogy for the purpose of the course, right? We've got to talk about this for 6 weeks, so we better understand what it means. And then we'll quickly examine some of the limitations of Freire's notion of critical pedagogy as well. So the format is, there are 5 readings. One of them is quite complex, Maclaren. So I put Maclaren more for those of you who want a more advanced reading, but we're not going to include Maclaren into the activity for Unit 2. But you have 4 other readings. And you are going to form basically de facto groups. You're not going to work in group, but you are going to basically spread out and pick one of the 4 articles. And I hope that you spread out by statistics. We should, have a good chance that everything gets covered. And we have 4 little groups basically engage with the readings. You are going to limit yourself to that article, and then you're going to read your peers' thread, a discussion thread in virtual form, and see what they have extracted, right? So at the end, we'll come back to a whole class format, and we'll combine the 4 perspectives which you have developed through the unit by focusing on the reading you've selected. There are also a couple of further references I'll show you on the slide, which are mostly just videos and web. This is mostly to suggest to you that if you want to go beyond your journal article, I don't really require that you read a second one, but there will be a lot of informal sources that can also help you. There's an awful lot of simple videos that are floating around explaining what critical pedagogy is. So you can definitely also browse those as support. As you engage with your reading in Unit 2, there are 3 main questions I'd like you to look at. So what are Paulo Freire's key components of critical pedagogy from what you gather in the source? How is it implemented in schools and educational spaces, or how could it be? And what are some of the challenges you foresee in the implementation of critical pedagogy? So when we look at it strategically in educational organizations, are there some limitations that you can already see come through in the reading that you have done this week? Okay, so three simple questions, and you can answer them in the same thread. So each article will have a thread, and you can try these 3 within the same thread, so that we keep just having 4 threads and it doesn't get too confusing. Once you're done, towards the end of Unit 2, have a look at what the other groups have done on their thread, and that should weave together a fairly comprehensive understanding of what's remained of Freire into 21st century education, and what can we still see being applied currently by current scholars. For text, the Bruning one is 2003. I really hate citing stuff that's older than 10 years, so I'm tapping myself on my own fingers. I really never do it, you will see, but I've looked at it again, and it is a really interesting article, and there isn't that much in 21st century that's written that's really accessible and easily palatable as a first point of access, so I've left it in. I don't recommend you cite the stuff that's more than 10 years old. It's really not recommended, but in this instance, we'll make an exception because it is quite an accessible article, and I think it's a good point of entry for this first unit. This is the extra slide, which I've promised you, where there's a few more things. To be honest, I haven't double-checked, I haven't clicked on the sites and seen whether they're still working. They were still working last year. Hopefully all of these are still adequate. Giroux is the new leading voice in critical pedagogy. So you have a piece there by Henri Giroux. He's also very keen on disseminating all of his work in open access format. So you will find a lot of Giroux's work floating around. He's not super, so he's Canadian. He works at Brock University in Ontario. He's not super accessible in his writing. It's very, you'll see, passionate and very theoretical. It's very different than what you're used to in writing in journal articles. So it's not always the easiest to get into, but you're bound to hit some of his work at some point, because really he's the new voice for the 21st century. He's the new Freire for the 21st century, basically. You have the Freire Institute there. I assume that at least if the link doesn't work, the Freire Institute will still be there. And it's just to give you a hint that there's a lot floating out there. So feel free to browse other YouTube videos and other simple websites too. Some advice, and I think this is really important: don't get too entangled into the theory. It's a complex theory, and you could really get lost. We only have 6 weeks, so we are going to go in depth but not get lost, right? So we want the depth, but we don't want to get lost in too much jargon and details and too many conceptual considerations. We're trying to make this a very applied course where we look at, yes, a critical theory, a critical pedagogy, which is a theory, but we're going to look at it in an applied context, right? What does it look like in the classroom? So try and always come back down to that, right? And you'll see that the second question is, how is it implemented? So bring it back to the classroom, bring it back to an environment, and see what it would look like. Be concise, be clear, use plain language always. My advice in academic writing and academic work is, the higher the level, the plainer the language. So this is going to be fairly high level. It's going to be quite complex. So don't use jargon, don't use complex expression. Take the language back down to very plain, what we call plain English, right? Which is actually something which is in Anglo-Saxon tradition really looked for. French and stuff have different approach to language, but in English we'd like things to be concise, simple, accessible, straightforward. That's what we're looking for here. Make sure that in the same line of thought, make sure that your explanations can be understood by the whole group. So there's no point, you're working really collectively to extract as much from these 4 articles as you can. There's no point doing that if your team member, the other teams don't understand what you're saying. So try and be, again, as plain as possible. Focus on your 3 questions and don't get too lost. There's obviously a lot more that we can unearth, but don't forget this is Unit 2. We are going to go into more depth for the entire course, right? So you don't need to answer all the questions and look at every single aspect now. We're starting with 3 questions. You've only got 3 days. I don't necessarily expect a linear read. If you have time, it's great, but you might get away with browsing and focusing on the important sections and really then going back and forth if you need to. We have to become strategic readers in graduate education. It's not necessarily about reading page one to the last page, but it's about actually being really strategic in the way we scan and browse our sources and find the essential. And then you can post the threads. Again, threads can get really boring when it's just text. Remember, you can put podcasts, you can videos, you can put PowerPoint. So your thoughts don't have to be in text format. And also make a note of any terminology that may come up. While avoiding jargon, which we're going to try and do, there's a little bit of key terminology that keeps coming back in critical pedagogy, and you're bound to hit it in Unit 2. So make a note, because we have a course glossary, and we might want at the end of Unit 2 to add a few key terms to the glossary, because we're going to keep encountering them over and over again. And then I'll put a 5th thread, a discussion thread in the forum, and this is for a whole class activity. You will all be responding on the same thread. We're going to try and come up with a plain English, concise, hands-on definition of what critical pedagogy looks like, because we need this for the rest of the course. It's obviously easy to explain if you've got 2 pages, but we don't always have 2 pages. If you write, if I use critical pedagogy as a lens in a journal article, I probably would have to introduce the reader to it in 2 sentences. So that's what we're going to try and do. Have something fairly concise that we feel is rich in detail, but also concise enough that we can use it frequently. And then we will look so I said 5 threads, but there will be 6 threads. We will also look at the limitation of phrase model. So you might say on the first slide, the last point was challenges, but that was really challenges in implementation. So I'm looking more at organizational and strategic issues that arise when we try and implement critical pedagogy in educational spaces or educational organizations. Here, I'm looking more at not strategic limitations, but more conceptual limitations, right? How has it aged? What's missing in 2021? Is there something the Frey didn't really foresee that now we need to discuss, right? Does this theory need to be adapted to the 21st century? And do we need to add to Freire's model in order to give to address the needs of 21st century education, or to make it possible to implement in 21st century education? And some resources. So that's it. Enjoy, and if you have any questions, let me know.